Is expected to deliver the African National Congress's annual January 8 statement later today. The statement is expected to outline issues within the party and, of course, focus on plans and manifestos for 2021. Ramaphosa is expected to address issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, gender-based violence and, of course, femicide. And due to the coronavirus, the annual statement will be delivered virtually and not with the traditional mass rallies. Professor Mcebisi Ndletyana is a political analyst and the author of the book Anatomy of the ANC in Power, Insights from Port Elizabeth 1990 to 2019. And he joins us now to talk about this. Professor, good morning and welcome to Morning Live.
Happy New Year.
And to you. So it's January 8th statement this evening. What do you expect to hear from President of the ANC? What will he present, according to you, the touch points that he needs to make?
Well, there is a number of things that he has to look at. The major one is the local government elections coming up later this year. And there are a lot of things that the ANC needs to do to get there. One, you have a number of their structures that have not been properly elected. They need to have elections, for instance, for regional executive committees and possibly for PECs as well, I don't know. So the challenge then is when can you have that? Following that, of course, you have the much contentious issue of having nomination, or rather, nominating candidates for those elections. Those tend to be very contentious, and that will test the cohesion of the party. And of course, perhaps before that, you have the NGC, which has also been preceded by a number of contentious things, prominent among which obviously is the corruption issue, and especially the one that relates to Ace Magashule. There are some people who believe that these charges are somewhat fabricated for some strange reason, and they are only being leveled against a particular set of people. This is a party, Sakina, that is still mired in a whole lot of problems, fairly unstable. So this year is going to test whether or not the president can really turn things around. So far, I think he hasn't really done much. You have the president, you have the ANC as a party, you have ANC as government. In government, they've done well, commendably well, but as a party, they remain extremely unstable. So those are things that will come up sometime this year.
Let's unpack that a little further. When you say as a government they've done fairly well, let's speak to that. And also, the factionalism within the party. And as you say, perhaps not faring so well, but President Cyril Ramaphosa is the president of the party, and he, of course, has to deal with that and outline solutions to address that factionalism within the party.
Well, you see, as a government, he's fairly in charge. He's not challenged that much. He doesn't really have to. He does have to consult, but he holds all the authority to make decisions. And it's fairly clear what he needs to do. So hence he has done appointing good people into public institutions, making sure that investigations are done. And also he has, to some level, public support because there's a lot of outrage against corruption, So there he's safe. But in the party, and the major thing about the party, really, and this is something that we continue to harp on, I'm afraid, is corruption. A party that has been built on a web of corruption. There are a few people in the ANC who have not taken money in properly. You can go to any REC structure, for instance, of the ANC. You will find a chairperson of the REC who lives beyond his means, unemployed, but the fellow is doing fairly well, mainly because most of these people have been using government budget as their own personal purse. So as soon as you go for corruption, you are likely to touch a number of people within the ANC. And even though society at large frowns upon corruption, some of these ANC members, even rank and file members, benefit from corruption. So the kingpins of corruption tend to have a huge following, a following that they maintain by providing patronage. So they share the spoils with these people. So corrupt people in the ANC, even though we frown upon them, are not necessarily unpopular. They command some support, and therefore they are power brokers. That is why some of the ANC NEC members are kind of ambivalent as to whether you should go against ACE. One, they might also be implicated, but most importantly, they fear that they might need ACE later on to bring his support behind their candidature. So it's a tricky issue. It's not straightforward, but obviously the president of the ANC has to govern in favor of society at large. He cannot make ANC problems societal problems. And most importantly, because the ANC sees itself as a leader, a moral leader of society. So you cannot be nitpicking and coming up with fanciful arguments around issues of corruption that step aside. So you need to develop the framework. Society expects him to do that. And the fact that he hasn't done that shows that in the party, he's not completely in charge. Because by now, Ace Magashule should have gone. 2017 conference said, if you are charged, you must step down. But instead of following that resolution, they withdrew, they stepped back. I mean, that was a cop-out to say that, well, you still have to work out the modalities. What modalities?
So, and it speaks to the point that you raised earlier about how many people within the African National Congress can, at this point, claim that they are squeaky clean and that they have never received monies improperly. So how can they then act against other members of the party when they themselves may be tainted?
You see, another interesting issue that I noticed quite recently is Paul Mashatile. Paul has been fairly straightforward against impropriety. He led the charge against Jacob Zuma, for instance. And when he was part of the Gauteng leadership, he was quite strong on these things. And of course, Gauteng leadership has been big on renewal for the last 10 years or so. But Paul recently has been speaking with a forked tongue, especially on the Ace Magashule issue, that he must be treated fairly, that maybe he doesn't have to step down. I mean, all sorts of things that one can't make sense of. And part of the reason I suspect is that Paul has ambitions, perhaps of higher office beyond Treasury General, and he is nursing or eyeing supporters of Ace Magashule, right? So he doesn't want to go against Ace Magashule on this corruption issue because he fears that he might alienate Ace loyalists. It's like, Donald Trump and the Republicans. They know that Donald Trump is a mess, but they don't want to go against him because they still want to get his supporters. So you have the same thing here with Ace Magashule.
So a lot of talk about whether the party is or will be able to self-correct at any point, because as you said, what you necessarily don't want to see is all of that dynamic playing out within the party spilling over into the state. But unfortunately, it does spill over into the state and to broader South African public space. So will the ANC ever be able to correct itself? And if so, how? How should they go about doing that?
The extent of corruption, as I've been saying, the extent of corruption within the party has blunted its ability to self-correct. I don't think we should expect that impulse, that catalyst to come from the party. It will not. It will most certainly, when and if it does come, it will emanate from the state, from the prosecutions, right? Because the president on his own within the party and some of his supporters don't have sufficient strength to go against corrupt people within. They keep on coming with these fanciful arguments, modalities, all sorts of nonsense. However, when these people are charged, as they are being charged now, courts look at evidence. They don't have time for nonsensical arguments, right? And so as some of them get prosecuted, you limit their number within the ANC. And some of their supporters, as they see their kingpins fall, they too will be intimidated into compliance and following, lining up behind the command of the president. So the only salvation for the ANC will come from the state, will come from prosecutions. That's the only way the ANC can rectify itself within the party. There is no resources. There is no will really to do that, because if you were to go whole out, against corruption in the ANC, a lot of people, Sakina, will be arrested. The ANC has been mired in corruption for the last 10 years. It was a subculture of the party. There's hardly anyone who hasn't taken something, and most of them know who has taken what. So that is why it's like they're blackmailing each other. Why me? But you've also taken. And also there's this funny argument that why are you now taking law and order seriously simply because we have taken something? At some point you took also, and yet you never talk about law and order. So this whataboutism principle that they talk about.
Well, Professor Ndletyana, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for engaging us this morning, a political analyst and author of the book Anatomy of the ANC in Power, Insights from Port Elizabeth 1990 to 2019, talking to us there about the January 8th statement, which will be presented later today by President Cyril Ramaphosa.